Thank you. It's not nerve-wracking at all going up against the mighty Blanche. I've got no chanting, you'll be relieved to hear. He may have later, I don't know. Leader-follower grazing, yeah, it suits us really well. What is it? Why do we do it? Increased biological efficiency. Sounds really flash. I'll try and explain what that really means to me anyway. You know, it works really well when you've got two distinctly different classes of stock, or stock with distinctly different nutritional needs. So for us, that has been a case of, in general, putting ewes and lambs in front of cows and calves, as we've heard a bit about today. But not necessarily. We've brought those principles into other aspects of what we do, and how we go about things varies through the year. So why did we get into it, and what was the attraction initially? Well, it was, we'd got into rotational grazing, we'd got paddocks put up with electric fencing, not dissimilar to how John's got here. Our paddocks were on average about 3 hectares, and that was all going rather nicely, but we had at the time, we probably had about 5 different groups of sheep, 3 different groups of cattle. That was probably a couple of bulling groups and a group of young cattle. And that, to my poor little brain, is 8 different decision points on when you're moving anything. But perhaps more importantly, from a pasture management, grazing management point of view, it was stock were too long in any one paddock. So we were leaving stuff in for, well, 3 days at best, but quite often 4 or 5 days, maybe even 6 days, because the groups simply weren't big enough to eat the material in any particular paddock down in that time. And the problem with that was that, you know, you're then starting to hit the regrowth that's coming through, particularly at the peak of the growing season. So that was an issue for us, and we wanted to have more grazing pressure. So 2 ways to do that. One, we could make the paddocks smaller, or we make the mobs bigger. And we decided, because somebody said everybody's lazy this morning, I think, and I thought, yeah, but I think some of us are more lazy than others. I'm not necessarily lazy, but it was like the attraction of reducing the paddock size even more watering points. That wasn't hugely attractive. Increasing the mob sizes, we'd had a little bit of experience with that in various places over the years, and tried it ourselves. Realised we needed to make a few changes to make that work, but if we could make bigger mobs work, we could get into more grazing pressure. So how do we really make some extra grazing pressure was, what if we can put, you know, one mob behind another and figure out through the year which mob, where's your priority mob and where they're going. So that is what we've done. And to cut a long story short, it involves now, we've got about 380, 400 ewes, twins and singles, running in the leader mob, and 110 cows and heifers in the follower mob. And the ewes and lambs will go into that paddock for a day. They pick the best stuff out of there, the best half of what's available, all the sweeties, if you like. And then the cows and calves this is through June and July. The cows and calves are following on and eating up the bread and cheese, if you like. So that's the system for then. And as John's already alluded to, I think when we were down in the field earlier, it was just very difficult to get good animal performance, individual animal performance from rotational grazing if we were trying to reset pastures with ewes with twins in particular. It was, you just were taking a hit on performance. I think we do get a little bit hung up sometimes on lamb weaning weights and individual lamb performance. Matters more to us is actually grams per hectare of gain that you're making, or kilograms of gain per hectare. But that's an aside really to the story of being able to give the ewes and lambs that best half of it at that point, and then the cattle the second half. And at this point of the year, so obviously we've moved on from that stage and we've weaned ewes and lambs, but at the moment we've got a leader follower going, but it's with the ewes, the thinner half of the ewes, and the anything that needs kind of a bit more of a kick are in the leader group, and the follower group are the fat ewes that don't need any additional nutrition. So we've kind of brought the principle through into other parts of the year as well, and even into winter feeding. But that's another story. How many long have I got?
That was 41 seconds left.
Well, that's spot on. I think I've covered it. But the basics for us are increased grazing pressure without a big spend on additional infrastructure, and just simplicity. One decision point for my poor little brain is that there's that one mob, or 2 mobs if you like, but they're right next door to each other. The followers push the leaders forward. When the followers need to move, they push the leaders forward, and everything is very simple. And I'm going to one place each day to move stock and make decisions on our size of farm. Obviously, on a bigger place, you'd want to replicate that, but rather than those 8 different decision points through the year.
So, you know when you were at school and you used to get bullied and all the cool kids hung around together? Oh, it's just me. Right, okay. So, but that's how I feel about leader follower, because all the really cool and good farmers do leader follower, right? And you know the really, really switched on ones, and John Ritchie do it. And it kind of slightly annoys me. And you know, in terms of our farming journey, I as a new entrant, every day is a school day, and we're progressing through my farming career, searching for the panacea, what's going to work, and all that sort of stuff. And there's little snapshots in my past that I remember, and they form principles. So the first one was when I was in New Zealand. Got a last day in New Zealand of 3 weeks. I'd gone round the country, hearing about grass, going in one ear, out the other, and I came to this share milking guy, and he had all these paddocks, and he says, "You never leave your cows in for more than 3 days." And that's what leader followers do. They break the first rule of Grazing Club, the second rule of Grazing Club, and the third rule of Grazing Club. So that's one thing. And the other thing is when Trevor Cook came over for the grazing groups, he came out with this stat that blew me away. And you may have seen the graph, but a long time ago, Morden did a trial on worms and subclinical effects of worms, and they had a control. So the control was 0 worms in the pasture, no treatment, and of course they grew absolutely amazingly. And then there's a middle one, which we'll gloss over because it doesn't support my case. But then there was really heavy worm burdens, and they treated them every 3 weeks. And then they had really heavy worm burdens where they didn't treat them at all. And the ones that were treated every 3 weeks just grew a little bit more than the ones that were never treated before. And the ones that were in the control, so no worm burden, no treatment, grew 50% faster. 50% faster, no control. So what do we want to do? We want to absolutely limit the worm burden in our pastures. Yeah? And we want to grow as much grass as possible. I was Googling how much grass, if we grazed it over 3 days, you know, beyond that critical 3-day period. Listen up, Finley, you need to remember this for your lifetime. But if you graze over that 3-day period, how much grass dry matter do you lose? And I couldn't find it at all. But there was a study done by Russell Armstrong et al. At breakfast this morning. They are the dairy farmers, because the dairy farmers know about grass. We beef and sheep farmers take their knowledge and totally bastardize it by doing leader follower. So Charlie Russell had told me that 30% more dry matter you get if you don't break the first rule of Grazing Club. 3 days, yeah, come on, let's chant it. Right, how long have we got? Because I'm struggling here. Right, oh God. Right, the other thing, okay, I want you to spare a thought for the cows, right? These cows, what a life. So the sheep come in and they graze for 2 days, yum, 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 yum. And then the cows get into this pasture covered in sheep shit, and it's crap grass, all the crap grass is left. How would you like it? I know some of you like sheep shit, but it's not, look, come on. I think we've got to I was always for exploiting my animals, and I'm only joking, but it wasn't far off. But I think we've got to think about our animals a bit more. I think they have to have a good life, not just an acceptable life. So let's go. Oh gosh, oh no, I've insulted people now. But just think about it, that's all I'm saying. So I would prefer clean grazing. Now this is where I admit that I'm not there yet. So total hypocrite. But we are moving towards this. We're balancing up our cattle and our sheep balance. I will be clean grazing next year. So a clean grazing as in 1 year's break. And it's only with lambs we get to use, the ewes get a free pass, because, that's easy. Okay, Great.
Thank you, Michael.
QMS did a video on clean grazing and how wonderful it was. Who was the main star of that video?
Maybe, but yeah, I think it might have been us, was it?
Yes.
Yeah, it was, and it wasn't like yeah, as Andrea says, we've moved on, mate. We've moved on. No, I'd still be an advocate of clean grazing, and I think a lot depends on your stock balance, your stock classes on farm and things. But the thing that trumped that for us was the being able to develop that grazing pressure without a massive spend on infrastructure. So we felt that trumped that for the time being. It has anyway. And that in terms of worm burden and such like, we are looking at advantages such as the fact that the worm larvae are lower down in the pasture, so those sheep won't necessarily be challenged by them in the same way that they might have been where they're just on their own rotation. And also the fact that cattle are following, there's quite a significant dilution effect when they do take in those worms and then process them.
So is your sheep performance as good and your cattle performance as good?
Cattle performance is as good as it was, and I think sheep performance has improved significantly. Yeah, to be fair though, to Mike, we're only, I think it's the third year into that journey, and I may have concerns that if we go forward, as we go forward, do we get ever more wormy? Doesn't feel like that at the moment. I feel pretty good about it, but I don't have any science that's going to back that up. That will be experience will tell on that. But we and the stock and even the cows are enjoying the whole thing. And remember,
have you asked?
They're not necessarily always the followers. Sometimes they get to be leaders. You have to take a bit of the rough with the smooth, mate.
Okay. What's that? Is that a euphemism?
Stop it, no.
Do you have any further challenge for Mike, Charlie, based on his stance?
Well, the 3-day rule thing, I've lost a lot of sleep not being able to, since Mike first told me about that in about 2013, thinking, gee, I'm leaving them in one more day and I'm going to go to grazing jail tomorrow. A little white van's going to turn up.
You're nicked.
Yeah. But no, I accept that at the height of the growing season when grass is growing back really quickly, you are eating into that. You're eating some of your regrowth if you stay in longer than the 3 days. But we've tried to mitigate that by going to big groups in relatively small paddocks so that we are actually a day, the sheep are in for a day, the cattle are in for a day. So it's 2 days on time. Not 2 and 2 to make it 4 in total.
Yeah, that's. I forgive you for that.
Good.
But if people that are thinking about leader and follower are not going to do 1 day, 1 day, they're going to do 2 days, 2 days, or 3 days, 3 days. I'm looking at you, Graham. But that is. I'm just thinking it's a waste. Is it a wasted opportunity? Is the question.
Possibly, yeah, but I don't really see why you can't do a day and a day. A lot of people have got paddocks smaller than what we've got, I think. So, or perhaps are just happier putting up electric fences than I am. But so, I mean, water's probably a bigger limiting thing, to be honest, than fencing, realistically. But I don't see why you can't go to a day and a day if you've got the right paddock size for the right mob size, sort of thing. I do think that what's really important with leader follower is that the follower group doesn't have a requirement that is too small a proportion of the whole. So in general, I wouldn't want the follower group to be any less than a third of the total dry matter requirement, because I think, and ideally a half, because I've spoilt stock before where the follower group is, a smaller group. I put singles behind twins one year, and the singles weighed the same as the twins at weaning, sort of thing. Those sorts of things, but because they were relatively small proportion of what the whole, they didn't have bread and cheese. They had just the crusts that were left on the floor afterwards, sort of thing. So I think it's important to get that. And equally, if you have a very small leader group, like I've heard of people, where the triplets and maybe the hogs with twins of other leader group, then it can really favour them in a really nice way, and it works really well in those situations. So I think there's a lot of flexibility within it, and it doesn't have to be different species of stock.
Do you worm your lambs before weaning?
Quite often, yes. Quite often. But I would say, this is slightly unfair, but we also used to under clean grazing. But we weren't 100% clean grazing because we were a slightly cattle heavy system. So a lot of the stock were on nominally clean grazing, but some weren't. And that would be one of my other challenges to the clean grazing thing, is that it's actually logistically really difficult to be really true to it all the time. And there will be breakdowns. And I remember we had a breakdown in, I think it was the Foot and Mouth in 2007, and we were clean grazing. We were very strict, and we had to break rules because we had to keep stock on farm that we wouldn't otherwise. And I was tearing my hair out. I thought it was a disaster, but it didn't seem to have been such a disaster. And then we became more fluid with it. But after that, we probably weren't truly always clean grazing all of the sheep. So it's maybe an unfair trial. That would be my difficulty with your trial, your bit of research you picked up. That might have been a very idealistic situation. I don't know.
Okay.
The breakfast chat, yeah. No, the 50% extra growth for lambs under
30.
30.
Oh, 50%.
Yeah.
50% is at actual
For
trial.
the undrenched but on clean grazing, that's great. But is that I'm asking the question? I'm not saying it isn't, but is that trial replicable on a farm situation?
Hard. But what my argument would be, don't let perfect get in the way of good. You know what? Or better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah.
That's enough of that, thank you.
Excellent, good.
I'm sure there's people in the audience that have bursting questions or comments or challenges to this pair. If you can just shout out, because I haven't got any room in my...
What about co-grazing?
Co-grazing, what about co-grazing? Who are you putting that question to? Both.
We've done it, and it didn't work for us that year because it was 2018 when everything went really dry and we had to change how everything, put cattle into silage fields and things. I think it's entirely workable logistically. We were really surprised with that. I've been quite adventurous with some of that stuff, sometimes too much so, but it worked. But it felt like we could get more benefit from splitting the two, and particularly with ewes and lambs in that June-July period. I felt there was a much bigger benefit to be gained. My bigger worry was that the cattle, I'd be poor doing the cattle, but it seems to have been around the same, but I don't have a very good comparison for you, so apologies.
Any comment?
I don't know. This is really unscientific now, but it doesn't feel right because I like my cattle to be black and my sheep to be white. I like really clean lines. It's probably OCD, isn't it? But if you've got them all mixed up together, first of all, I think you would probably break the 3-day rule, maybe it's up to you, I suppose. But then you've got the issue of worming them all the time, because they're not clean grazing, and that's a logic. It's just maybe simpler. I think simplicity is something is crying out inside me.
Emily?
Oh no.
So, does it matter? 3-day rule applies most during peak grass production. Does it matter if you break it by a day? Because generally we all struggle to manage peak grass growth production. And also, does that, if we are breaking it, is that actually giving slightly more nutrition to the cattle anyway?
Just before you say, I'll just repeat the question. That's Emily Grant asking, does it actually matter if you break the 3-day rule? Does it matter if you have suboptimal production? And what was the second part to your question, sir?
And also, actually, does it provide a touch more nutrition? If that is the case, that they, on day 4, they're actually eating slightly higher quality because it's regrowth.
Yeah, so on day 4, they're maybe getting a benefit in terms of quality. Okay.
No, I'm joking. Of course it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I mean, that's the thing. You can. It's very easy. If you're rotationally grazing, you can beat yourself up if you don't get it quite right, and it's not a healthy thing. So, I suppose that's where the don't let perfect get in the way of good. I mean, I'm breaking the 3-day rule right now. so, but it's for a reason. I've justified it to myself, you know. So I think you can forgive yourself. Thou shalt be able to forgive yourself if you break it. But I just think, in theory, it would be a good thing to do, or something to strive towards. And I mean, the cows will need everything they can get, being in a follower and a leader-follower system. So they'll probably be grateful for the regrowth, right?
Yeah.
And lastly, from Graham.
Mike, it's on Emily's stage. Is there production effect to the animal or to the grass?
It's the production effect.
3-day rule.
If you break the 3-day rule,
Is the production effect to the animal or to the grass?
Grass.
Repeat the question, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Is the production effect
To the animal,
to the animal or
grass?
to the grass? And it's primarily to the grass, but in the clean grazing system, why are you laughing? In the clean grazing system, you would have cows going into grass 10 centimeters long, and they'd be loving it. So their production would arguably be better than the leader-follower. Am I right? Yes. Yes, it would be, because they'd have more condition. They'd have more condition going into the winter. Depends on your system. If you don't need them in great condition, you know. But I think there's arguments for both.
Can I throw one more in, Charlie, just when we're at it? Can you have a clean grazing system in a leader-follower system?
So Graham's asking, can you have a clean grazing system within a leader-follower system? Absolutely, yes. But it all depends on the balance of stock and stock classes and how you knock those out and put them together.
Can you explain how the hell you do that?
The sheep are clean grazed and the cattle fall.
But then they have poo-poos in the, yes they do, and then they have, yeah, what? they do.
We've got Johnny.
I was going to ask a follow-on to that if you get, what is the rest period needed in order that the worm burden for the sheep disappears? And could you have a leader-follower system where the sheep are going in first, cattle are coming in second, the sheep don't come in again until after the worms have all not had a chance to find their host again?
So what is the rest period required for sheep to reduce the parasite infection? And the second part?
Because it will be more than 35 days.
Yeah, so what's yeah. How long would you leave it to get, yeah.
I think everything I've read about trying to break the worm cycle with a longer rotation is the wheels have tended to come off because it's so unpredictable in terms of whether and when a hatch comes through. I think if it's very long, probably it's fine, but I mean very long. But within anywhere 30 to 60 days, I think you could end up being a total car crash coming back into when there's just been a good hatch. If the weather conditions have been right, you'll know better, I'm sure. But.
And I think Trevor Cook, he's a strange chap, but he kept L3 larvae in the fridge for 150 days. And I mean, they went, yeah, they were still alive. So, you know, they can persist in pasture pretty well. And I think a true clean grazing system is 2 years rest, which is really impractical, isn't it? But I think 1 year, it's just a matter of lowering the worm burden on the pasture, because the little thing between, you know, the treated every 3 weeks on heavily infested pasture and not treated at all in heavily infested, there wasn't a huge amount of difference. And that means, Andrew Elliott, wake up. That means that he was honestly asleep. So, so that means that the actual cleaning out the cleaning out the worms. It's the subclinical stuff that is really having an effect. So keeping the worms in the pasture is much more important than keeping the worms in the sheep down.
One final question. Oh, okay. Two questions. I'm too soft. Alex Brewster.
I just want to ask, you boys have both got sheep, but you've both got different types of sheep, wool on and wool off. Do you think having wool off is beneficial to a leader follower stroke clean grazing system? Different protein requirements.
Do you think being wool shedding is better for a clean grazing or leader follower grazing system?
Yeah.
I wouldn't make any claims myself because I've not looked into it, but purely from the protein, the lower amount of protein put into wool production, in theory, yes, there's a little bit more protein to challenge a worm challenge, but I think it would be fair. I don't know is the truth, but I'm guessing it would be relatively low effect.
So Alec is really mean because I've been trying to breed wool shedding sheep since 2003 and I still have to get the shearers in. So I am technically wool on, but I do have quite a lot of wool shedding. And I think there's a lot of claims coming out from the wool shedding fraternity, of which I am one, that is a wee bit stretching. I think there's a lot more diversity within, worm resistance does not depend on whether you shed your wool or not.